Considering that the 1982 movie was a slow burn with its pacing and didn't have a ton of action to it, this direct sequel 20 years later with a much greater focus on action might not translate so well as a video game, but as always, I'm willing to give anything a fair shot. And I really wish I didn't bother with this one. It's far from the worst game I've ever played, but it's definitely not good. From the level design, random difficulty spikes, brainless artificial intelligence, and a complex squad management system that doesn't actually get used for anything, this feels less like a polished game and more like an elongated tech demo that far overstays its welcome. The story takes place shortly after the events of the 1982 film and features original characters with some references to the movie. Captain Blake and his squad are ordered by Commanding Officer Whitley to investigate the now silent United States Antarctica base and figure out what's going on. It's not long until, just like with the movie, fellow humans are transforming into ugly monstrosities out for blood. And with a page taken right out of the science fiction cliche notebook, a third party is researching the thing for their own gains. Blake now needs the assistance of survivors he's not sure he can trust and somehow escape from Antarctica with guns blazing. Presentation-wise, it's par for the course considering the early 2000s. It's far from the best-looking game on the PlayStation 2, and it certainly doesn't hold up today, but it's good enough for what it is. There's not a whole lot in terms of music. The original movie was pretty quiet for the most part, but so much of a lack of music feels out of place here for a video game. The limited visibility caused by the never-ending snowstorm is neat at first, but it quickly becomes an annoyance. It's not quite a deal breaker, but man do I hate it. A couple of movie references are thrown in there, although they're always shoehorned in and they don't always make sense.
Got the kid? Good. The report said the hypo contains a chemical that reacts with blood. Do it. We'll soon know, one way or another.
Now I'm gonna show you what I already know.
And like any horror game, there's plenty of text documents to scour through. Nothing particularly well written, this stuff is clearly just thrown in there because it's expected of the genre. Most of the film references come from the first two levels, which are the United States and Norwegian Antarctica bases respectively. It's neat to get a general layout of the bases and see the notable rooms for the movie, but from then on it's all brand new locations with a pretty worthless story. I won't get into spoilers, but the big issue is that nothing happens for extended periods, and then once the plot does move forward, it's too little too late. Even the biggest plot twists are delivered about as effectively as a wet fart. But hey, I can be reasonable. Video games aren't always known for their stellar presentation, so let's focus on the gameplay from here on out. It's a fairly typical third-person shooter with an auto-aim function. It might be easy to forget, but even the original release of Grand Theft Auto 3 was heavily dependent on auto-aim, and it wasn't too uncommon for the time period. The Thing, however, has some pretty strange rules on how it handles this. Your auto-aim accuracy while standing is basically worthless, so you'll need to get used to crouching whenever you want to fire, and even then you'll still miss a lot. There's also a first-person mode with manual aiming, but this comes at the expense of mobility. However, your shots also have laser precision with no recoil, leading to a comical difference between the auto-aim and the manual aim. You can practically paint a silhouette around your target with bullets and auto-aim, or drop its health instantaneously with manual aim. If there's an enemy that can't reach you and you know what you're doing, manual aiming is by far the way to go. But usually you need to be mobile in general combat, which means you're going to spray and pray a lot in this game. Thankfully, you're given a generous amount of ammunition in your adventure, so this is rarely a problem, but that just means that you've got several layers of issues to accommodate the game's combat. why not just make the auto-aim work properly and then balance the difficulty around better mobility and resource management? All this does instead is just constantly force you to crouch, and you'll still have to hope that your shots land. The game as is, it's pretty dumb. It's perfectly workable, but not very good. You have an assortment of basic weapons like a machine gun, shotgun, and of course the flamethrower, which itself plays a vital role. Enemies can only be dropped down to critical health with conventional weaponry and need to be finished off by flames. This makes way for a little bit of potentially clever strategizing. You can burn enemies yourself while allies gun them down, or hand them the flamethrower while you provide support. However, for half the game, you're on your own anyway, which means you'll need to clunkily cycle through your inventory mid-combat, and even when you do have allies, I wouldn't trust them with anything beyond a pistol or machine gun. Certainly not the flamethrower, they end up being a liability more than anything. The combat as a whole isn't all that fun and is more of a hassle than anything else, but the only thing that helps make it all bearable is that the enemy AI is a total joke. I can tell that the developers tried. Enemies will back away from fire, and when you shoot them with guns, they'll slow down and stumble around, as if they're getting dazed or stunned by continuous attacks. All this means, though, is that as long as you're laying down oppressive fire, enemies are mostly non-threatening. You're just laying into them until their health gets low, and then you finish them off, simple as that. While it's commendable that the enemy reacts to your attacks, they don't have any idea how to react to the player, which leads this to be little else than a fancy shooting gallery. In fact, the most threatening enemies tend to be the smallest ones since they're so hard to hit, while the larger ones are such big targets that they can never move in on the player anyway. The most unique aspect of the game is the squad management system. You can arm your squad mates with any weapons and ammo you've come across, forcing you to decide what you'd rather keep and what you're willing to give up for the time being. But, like I said earlier, I wouldn't recommend giving anything away besides a pistol or machine gun. Again, ammunition is plentiful throughout the game, which is no doubt meant to ensure that there's enough for you and your buddies, but that really tones down the horror aspect quite a bit. This is all supported by each character's trust and fear. Disloyal soldiers won't follow your commands, and fearful characters are prone to killing themselves. But a simple way to improve your relation with everyone is to simply give them a gun and ammunition, which is what you already do anyway. There's a whole bunch of other stuff you can do, like using a taser to stop someone from shooting themselves in the head, or administering a blood test to prove that you or someone else isn't infected. But these bouts of suicide are so rare that it's not even worth concerning yourself over it, and if someone is infected, the transformation process is so obvious, so slow, and the enemy is so non-threatening that you just gun him down right then and there. I appreciate that they brought over these elements as inspired by the film. It is a pretty cool idea, but it's never actually utilized. The trust system doesn't do anything because there's never a time when you shouldn't give someone a gun, and that solves all your problems right there. Not to mention that the game straight up lies to you sometimes. You can give someone a blood test only to have them transform in a scripted moment seconds later. So what the hell's the point? Speaking of special meters, I should also briefly mention the temperature gauge that reduces whenever you're out in cold weather. It could have been a fine idea, but just like the other stuff, it never gets used in a meaningful way. It's just more hollow game mechanics to make it look like there's more here than there really is. At the very least, if someone dies or transforms, they drop their supplies right there, so you don't miss out on too much. But it is extremely common for a level to end very abruptly, and any allies you had and supplies they were carrying usually don't follow you to the next level. Sometimes it'll make absolutely no sense. Like when you're trying to outrun a bomb explosion and your squad mates just allow themselves to die, even when you're waiting for them to catch up. This is the very definition of a lazily produced game, or at least one that was on a tight deadline or something. They threw this stuff together and didn't even bother to make it coherent or have all the elements interact with each other properly. You can't possibly tell me that they wanted these allies to have any sort of meaning to them when they're always so disposable. Most of the time, it's a pretty easy game because it's usually straightforward with where you need to go, and the game is rarely shy with its health items. However, the occasional moments where neither is the case are the worst parts of the game. It'll just stop providing first aid kits for a long period of time, and then suddenly you find a cabinet with a near infinite supply. But nothing is more frustrating than running around a map with no clue what to do. I figured, it's logical that I have to find a way through this building to get to the other side, but after exploring for hours, I couldn't find anything. Well, here's a tip for anyone else having a hard time. You just walk around the fence. That's it. One of the hardest levels in the game has a save point at the halfway mark that doesn't work. Like, it's there, it just doesn't do anything. So you have to get through the whole level in one perfect run. Oh, but better yet, the game doesn't save in between levels either. You can restart the current level if you die, but if you want to shut off the game and take a break, then either you gotta go all the way back to the previous save point, or you need to muscle on to whenever the next save point might be. This game is so inconsistent and stupid, and I still haven't even touched on the boss fights. They're all similar, just a single giant enemy who stands still and deals ridiculous damage if you get close, but they can all be cheesed in a specific way. The first boss can't reach you if you stand in a corner, although you'll need to deal with enemy reinforcements, and the second boss can be stunned by flicking an electrical switch over and over. Needless to say, it's not very fun, but the third boss is where things get out of hand. You need to rush to the flash grenades on the other side of the room and use those to keep it stunned while you attack it. I never emphasized how awkward the controls are, especially for combat, because the game usually isn't active enough to have to warrant it, but it really becomes a problem during the last quarter. Sometimes you have to do this stupid leaning out of cover nonsense to destroy an automated turret because there's no practical solution to get through here otherwise. The last few levels turning into an endless shooting gallery with wave after wave of enemies is such a poor way to close off an already disappointing game. The Thing has some neat ideas, and technically those ideas are executed, occasionally, rarely, but they are there and they kind of work, which honestly I think is almost commendable for a PlayStation 2 game. If anything though, it reminds me a lot of Alone in the Dark 2008. It's all a bunch of neat ideas that don't go anywhere, trying to support a mediocre game with the whole thing ending up half-baked, at best. I can respect the game for sort of adhering to the themes and ideas of the movie. An attempt was made, but it's not done well enough, and as a direct sequel, it plays out like fan fiction, especially the ending. At the very least, it wasn't the worst thing in the world. It took about 11 hours to get through on the hardest difficulty, although the way the game handles the difficulty selection seems weird and dumb. I'm not entirely sure it affects all that much. Anyway, I would much rather play this anytime over games like Alone in the Dark or Winback, but that is hardly a compliment. Thanks for watching my review on The Thing.